Salute is a program for and about men and women who have served our country. Our program includes news about the laws that affect veterans, information on benefits and services, and news from veterans organizations. And now, our host, Bob Peters.
Hello and welcome to Salute. I'm your host, Bob Peters, and with me today is Mr. Jack Reynolds. Jack is a Korean veteran, and he's led a very interesting life, not just with the Korean veteran, but also a very well-decorated veteran. I thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I thank you for coming on the show. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're originally from?
Well, I'm originally from southern Indiana, a little old town down about 75 miles south of Indianapolis. And I grew up in this small town, and up until the time I was 18, I probably hadn't been 150 miles in any direction. So I knew very little about traveling until a man suggested we should join the Army.
Yeah, you were telling me that. Tell that story about how you were sitting there.
We were sitting on the steps in front of a Masonic temple, and one boy said, "You know, we ought to join the Army." So there was three of us, and we thought that'd be a grand idea, like young boys had never been anyplace. We went to Cincinnati, Ohio to enlist, and it turns out that I was the only one that made it, and the other two boys didn't pass the physical.
Bye, Jack.
And Jack was by himself, and the next thing I knew, I was in Fort Knox, Kentucky, in the Army. I was there for, I think it was 12 weeks basic at that time, and in a matter probably, I'd say 16 weeks total, I was on a ship in California getting ready to go to Korea. And the ship, I never saw the ocean before, never saw anything before. But the ship pulled out in San Francisco, and under the Golden Gate Bridge, and I vividly remember I was looking back at that thing, and I was starting to get queasy and a little bit sick. And needless to say, I spent the next 21 days, most of the time, on the aft end of the ship. They had potatoes piled up in bags, and I was laying on those potatoes or heaving over the side. Sick all the way till we pulled into the Tokyo Bay, and I got straightened up. We was there for a short time, and then I was loaded onto a Japanese. It was a Japanese boat, and you sat on the floor. They didn't use seats in those days in Japan. Everybody sat on the floor, and it was like a ferry boat, and they hauled us to Korea, and this was a short distance. And from the time I was sitting on the Masonic Temple steps thinking about joining the Army, probably 20 weeks later, I was in Korea getting ready to go into combat.
So, what did I get myself into?
Right, it was quite a change to be, and it was amazing. They brought us forward to this little assignment camp, and it was on a river, a little river, I think it was the MGM River, and this old master sergeant was assigning us to different companies, and he had me come forward, and he handed me a Browning automatic rifle, BAR, and I said, "Sergeant, what is that?" He said, "Don't get smart with me." He said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "I took tank basic. I learned to drive a Sherman tank in Fort Knox, Kentucky. The only thing I ever fired was a carbine and a .45. He grabbed that gun out of my hand, got it clipped, said, "Come here," and he called me boy. He said, "Come here with me, boy," and he put it back and walked out on the river. I never saw one before, and he held it down, and he burst about 10 rounds. He handed me, he said, "Now you do it." And I'm not scared to death, but I did. He said, "You're qualified."
Yeah, that's how it works.
That's how it works. And the next thing I knew, I was up on a hill. I was in Fox Company. I was in the 1st Cavalry, it was the 8th Regiment, 2nd Battalion. And so it didn't take long. It turned out that the man had an assistant barman, and I will never forget that man's name. Of all the people I was in combat with, I will never forget him. He was assistant barman, and he was always very planned out ahead. When we were on a hill where we were going to dig in. We'd dig a foxhole, and it'd be wide, maybe 4 foot wide and maybe 2 foot and about 4 foot deep. He would make him a little shelf into that dirt. And I carried 12 clips for my BR, and he carried 14 for me. And he would stack those all up on a ledge, and he drove a stick into the edge of that foxhole, and he'd take regular concussion grenades and hand grenades, and he'd string them on there just by the pin. And we'd get in a firefight. If he hard look out, you better look out, because he was always definitely afraid that the Chinese or the North Koreans could get in the hole with us. So right in the middle of a firefight, he might be loading clips, but he'd take a grenade, pull it, and pop the pin, and just throw it over the edge of the hole. And he'd go off right in front of us. So you better duck when that happened. But anyhow, he was a good man, and he and I were together all the time. And the first time that we were in a firefight, and I don't know what happened, but I must have been screaming. Either I was afraid, and anybody that says they're not afraid in a firefight, I think they're lying, because I was scared to death all the time.
Sure.
And I got hit in the mouth with either a spent bullet or a piece of shrapnel that took these teeth out. He led me off of the hill that time, and they sent me back to a MASH unit. I was there about 7 days or 8 days. And in those days, if you could walk and all, then you were right back in, because it was right in the middle of the fire. In 1951, it was right in the middle of a lot of the big firefights. And again, Bud and I were together. And we were on a patrol, and had a young lieutenant had just got over there, was our commander. And he looked across with binoculars down a big hill and across a bunch of rice paddies and up another hill, and you could see the Chinese were digging in. Fox gave you a lot of trenches. There's trenches from one end of Korea to the other, completely across. We dug them, and the Chinese did too, both. It was kind of like World War I in that respect, I think. But anyway, he told us, my squad, that we need to go out and go to and check that out. Well, you could see what they were doing, but he was determined, so we did. And we made it all the way across, and there's a little house out there in the middle of a bunch of rice paddies. And we got to there, and our squad leader, and I can't even remember his name, he said, they're digging a hole, let's get out of here. And we started running back one at a time. And for whatever reason, I was the last man to run backward. And by that time, there was a lot of small ardent spar coming in. And I ran off into a rice paddy in water, maybe knee deep. And I was churning through this rice paddy, and a mortar round come down and hit in front of me, went under the water and exploded. It blew me out of the rice paddy. And I didn't know what to do, but when I came to, of course, my head was ringing, but I couldn't hear very much. But anyway, Bud Weatherstein was this man's name. He was already over there. He saw me laying out there. Bud came back out there on his own under fire, picked me up and dragged me out of that place. And it was funny. He was swearing every other word, and he kept hollering, "Don't you die, don't you die." And he cussed me out all the way, dragging me out of that place. And they put me on stretcher and got me out. And that was the last time I ever saw that man. I have no idea whether he made it out alive or not, but I've never forgot his name and what he done for me. And after that, they had me repo depot, they called it, and that lieutenant said, he looked at my record and he said, I've been wounded twice in the same month. So he said, I'm not going to, they'd probably kill you if I send you back there again.
Yeah, you're pushing your luck.
Yes. So they put me into the 82nd Pipeline Engineers. It was an engineering company down in Incheon. And that was quite an experience. What they actually done, they laid an 8-inch pipeline from Incheon Harbor up to Kimpo Air Base, and from Kimpo Air Base up to Yeongdong-po, which is right across the river from Seoul. And eventually we got it across the river, And I didn't work on it, but from Seoul north, it went all the way to Wee Jumbu, is fuel for tanks, trucks, and all that sort of thing. One of the funny things about that, of course, funny things do happen. After we built that line from the road from Kimpo Air Base to Seoul, it laid right along the side of the road, and it broke for whatever reason. And every mile there's a shut-off valve in that main line.
Yeah.
Well, there was a mile of gasoline run out in that road, and it was in the middle of the night, dark, and we were there trying to get the valve shut off, and there's a convoy come down the road with a bunch of lights shining. So I run up to the road to get them stopped, and I finally got them stopped, and this lieutenant says, "Get out of the way, we've got to get through here." I said, "You can't get through here." I said, "There's just no way you can." So he insisted, "We get out of the way." I said, "We have to get through here." He said, "There's people that's really important here." And I said, "I don't care if it's a president." He looked at me and said, "That's who it is." That's when
Really?
General Eisenhower
Yeah.
flew over after he'd been elected president, and he flew to Korea on one of these prompts. Hadn't had it turned out. I was the one who stopped him on the road in the middle. Didn't know it at the time.
No.
But that's who it actually was. So there's funny things happen, and there's a lot of serious stuff also.
Did they get through, or
We had to hold them
you
for a
must have
while.
made some kind of accommodations?
Yeah,
right?
we had to hold them for a while, and really it was dangerous when we went through, because there was thousands of gallons of gasoline off in the side ditches.
One little spark, boom.
Had been gone. What they would do when that would happen, we had saboteurs blew up the lines quite often, and they weren't welded. They were coupled together 21-foot joints of pipe.
Mm-hmm.
And people, the Korean people, the South Korean people, even if a little bit of gasoline was fuel for those people,
Oh yeah.
and if that line would break somewhere out in a rice paddy, before you know it, they'd be lined up down there, 150 buckets and cans. Well, they told us to make sure you get everything cleaned up before you leave it. Come on in, get all you want. And those people would come in, the Koreans, and they'd dip it up, even down to where they put it in a cloth and they'd wring it, get the last of the gasoline out of it. That's what they used for their fuel and for light and anything. And
Yeah, because it got very cold over there. We know of the history of Korea and
Yes.
frostbite and everything.
it was in North Korea, in northern part of, north of Seoul, up north of the 38th parallel. I know that one winter it was 30 below zero,
Wow.
and laying in the snow. And I made this statement then to myself. I guess I never forgot it. I said, if I ever get out here alive, I'm not going to lay in the snow again. And it turned out that after I got out of the service and I went to work for the Department of the Navy, and I traveled a lot. So I kind of made sure that in January, February, and March, I was in California, I was in Hawaii, I was in Okinawa. I wasn't where it was snowing.
Yeah.
And the day I retired, I moved to Florida to get out of the snow.
Yeah, I want you to tell us more about after the service, because it was really interesting. We had a little chat before, and it was very interesting. But why don't you show us what you brought along? I thought those were rather interesting.
Okay. This picture here is a picture of
A handsome dude. Who's that guy?
that's me
Oh.
leaning against the plane. That was the airplane of General Ridgway. He was the Supreme Commander, Allied Commander in Korea. He took the place of General MacArthur and had a little dirt runway. They landed the plane beside where we were camped out at the time. And being an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old there, not too smart, I wanted my pictures. I was up laying up against the side of his plane and had his picture taken.
He was a 5-star general, I said. It said on the
5-star
back,
general,
yeah.
yes. He was Supreme Commander there. This, you can see the pipes here, and you see one that's it's bent and tore up. That's where they were blown up by saboteurs. They had some people come down during the night and blew those up. There were some people that would try they would try to uncouple the pipeline to get gasoline out, and they'd get on fire. One fellow we saw one time, but he was had a 5-gallon bucket trying to get gasoline and put a cigarette in his mouth, and he'd stroke a match trying to light a cigarette.
Oh my God.
And there wasn't much left of him.
No.
This, we call it an A-frame, but this is a standard type of transportation that the Korean people used back in those days. And it's amazing how much they could carry and how high they would stack this. And the women wore these just the same as men, and that was standard transportation of those people. And it's amazing that in North Korea, these are still in use.
Yeah, yeah.
In South Korea, it's a museum piece. It's that much difference between the North and the South. This picture that you see here, this is a picture of Busan. And you have to remember that Busan would be about the size of Orlando. And today, Busan would look a whole lot like Orlando. You would see subways, you'll see tall buildings, skyscrapers, everything. It looks like the United States. But this is the way it looked in 1951. And these mostly were refugees that you see here in this picture. And they actually did have the buckets and cans that you see. That's just the way things were.
Mm.
This picture here, the front, would be kind of the standard dress that you would see some Korean people at that time. Most people weren't quite that lucky. They didn't have that kind of dress to wear. They wore more or less a shorter blouse, and they wore pants with rubber shoes. And these rubber shoes that they wore were like moccasins, because most people, if they lived in the country, they worked in the rice paddies. And they would wade that water all day, and their feet was very, very tender. And they had these rubber shoes that they wore. This, what you see here, it's fairly faint now, but it was made in 1951. And I think about this, I can't remember for sure exactly where I got this, but I got it somewhere at that time. But can you imagine, in the middle of the war in 1951, somebody that was an entrepreneur said, I'm going to start a business, and this somebody or group of people, this is a kind of a silk cord here.
Yeah, we were talking about that before. It almost looks like during World War II, my mother had a lot of my uncles, in fact, the pillow covers.
Yeah, and but anyway, I've thought about that a lot. That's why even in the war was still hot and heavy in those days, but somebody was still going to be an entrepreneur and come up with this, you know, and it's different than what most people would say.
Yeah, 61 years ago. Wow. But, so, tell us a little bit more about, you know, because I found it interesting. You did your service for our country, and you were awarded 2 Purple Hearts, and,
yes.
and I salute you for your service. But after the Army, you also kept going with the government.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I got out of the Army, and my wife and I had been married about 6 weeks before I was discharged. She was already working for the Department of the Navy. And by the way, the largest Navy base in the United States is in southern Indiana. It's 75 miles south of Indianapolis. It covers parts of 3 counties, Martin County, Greene County, and Lawrence County. It covers about 110 square miles. And it was built there, the reason it was built there in that spot, and during the Second World War started, they thought they'd put it far enough inland that the German bombers could fly that far in to bomb it if they offered an aircraft carrier. They also built another one in Hawthorne, Nevada. It's far enough inland in Nevada, they didn't think the Japanese could fly that far in. But Anyway, I went to work for the Department of the Navy, and I worked in public works to start with, and then they sent me to school, and they wanted me to learn pneumatic control. And the idea was we had to handle live explosives all the time. And in these buildings, there could be no electricity whatsoever other than explosion-proof lights in the ceiling. You had to wear a special shoe that was a solid ground all the time. We had ladies who worked on the production line. Everybody wore a white jumpsuit. And even the ladies, with their bra and all, it was string tied, no metal any place whatsoever, no metal. And I was on the ground floor, I guess, helping design machines, the control circuits for all these different machines. It was all done by pneumatic and hydraulic control, no electricity. And I did that for quite a few years. And the Vietnam War started, and I worked with the Marine Corps at that point in time, taking care of their ammunition that they had stored in open storage in Vietnam, and it'd rust up and the fuses would corrode. We had to have a cruiser guy go over and defuse it. The first time we got ready to go to Vietnam, we had 3 semi-trailers loaded with a rolling machine shop, every tool it takes to do the job. They were shipped over ahead of time. They were stored in a big ammunition field, which got on fire and blew up.
Oh boy.
And all 3 machines, all 3 trailers we worked on and designed all went up in flames. So we had to redo it again before we could go, you know. I did that during the Vietnam War. And then after that, in the meantime, they started sending me to these different schools, engineering schools. And then they would, the federal government would sell surplus ships, mostly destroyers, and they sold them to a lot of the foreign governments that, you know, that we were friendly with. And I know that one of them, that Chiang Kai-shek, he came back into to Formosa when the communists took him out of mainland China. And they sent me to China there to work and to put in this. That was really interesting. I had to set up a production line to load 5-inch 38 and 5-inch 54 ammunition. I couldn't speak Chinese. They couldn't speak English. So there's a lot of this punching and looking at drawings and pointing. We actually set up the equipment we already had made, but I needed pipe fitters to hook up the hydraulic presses and all, and I asked for 2 pipe fitters, and these 2 little men walked up. One had a 14-inch wrench in his hand, the other had an 18-inch, and that was all their tools to put in hydraulic lines, to put in hydraulic presses. But you could point and tell them what you wanted, and they would run off, and they get enough people, and they get it done. Anyway, after that was completely finished, before I got ready to leave, they said that the commander wants to talk to you in the Chinese army. And I went into this office, and he was a Navy admiral, and he had me sit down, and we were talking for a while, and he had quite a few aides around him. And he said something to the aides, and they went to a cabinet, they came back, and they gave me, and I still have it today locked up in the bank vault. They gave me a little pink box, and I opened it up, and there was a set of gold cufflinks and a gold tie bar. And on the tie bar it had a camel, had 3 humps and a set of wings on the camel. And I said, what does that mean? He said, well, when Chiang Kai-shek came over here from the mainland China the first time, their emblem was a 1-hump camel because he ran across the Gobi Desert. He could go a long way without water.
Right.
After he passed on, the next man in charge of Taiwan was a man who was with the Navy in the Second World War, and he was in a destroyer, so he put the 2nd hump on the camel. So it's a 2-hump camel. After his time, his Air Force general took over. He put a set of wings on the camel. And this man that I talked to, he was an admiral, and he was had something to do with the U.S. Navy on a battleship. So he put the third hump on the camel. So these were designed by his own personal jeweler. I got his card and all. And I don't think there were too many of those sets made. I don't know. But that was one of I was always kind of proud of that, you know.
Yeah, I don't think you'd find too many 3-hump camels with wings.
No, and I've got it in the bank vault. I want to keep them there. But anyhow, with the Chinese, and then I worked with the Japanese Navy, and I worked with the Greek Navy. They sent me to Athens, Greece, and that was very interesting. I worked in a little island off the coast of Athens. But I got to go around to visit, and then to go to downtown Athens. I went to the Parthenon. I was on the mount there where Paul preached, and I was, like I was saying before, that I didn't know, but there's a big stadium there, and the Emperor's chair was in this stadium. I thought, well, that looks nice. So there's two of us, another fellow with me, and I reared back in the chair and smiling big, and he's taking the picture. I got the picture, but needless to say that the authorities was down there quick getting me out of there because they didn't want nobody.
It's not a good move to sit in the Emperor's chair, though.
Yeah, there's thousands of people come every day. The thing would be wore out if they let them do that, you know.
Yeah.
But we got to travel around. I got north of Athens. It was Corinth. And the 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians in the Bible, I walked on the streets, and he give you, that was covered by a landslide or volcano eruption. They dug it out. A lot of the old streets, the cobblestone streets, are still there, and there were some springs that had been covered up, and they uncovered those, and those springs come back to life, actually flowed again, and you could walk down those streets there, and you could just imagine that. That's where Paul, out of the Bible, he walked those streets, you know, and he give you cold chills walking up and down too.
Yeah. You know, Jack, the time flies.
Yes.
And we're almost out of time.
Yes.
But I'd like to tell the viewers at home about you and what you've done along with your fellow Korean veterans, going to the school systems and the experiences you've had that. And you've also volunteered your time to help build some churches throughout the country. And I want to tell you what a great guy I think you are for doing all of that. And I only have 40 seconds left.
Yes. Yes.
So I have to say goodbye, and I really kind of wish we had more time.
Yes.
But I thank you for everything you did for our country, and it's a pleasure having you here.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much.
So to all our veterans out there, active military and their families, we salute you for all you do. Till next time. We are now entering our third year salute here at Lakefront TV. We've had many great guests and veterans organizations share their stories with us. We'd like to hear from you too. If you're a veteran or a veterans organization, Lake Sumter counties, please give us a call. Lakefront TV can be seen all over Lake County and the villages and worldwide at lakefronttv.com.